Kyle Reddick could become a free agent at the end of the 2025 season, depending on what happens with the 2311 Informer Motorsports lawsuit, and NASCAR will not return to the Chicago Street Course in 2026, but could return in 2027. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got on NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into this really quickly. We're going to start by talking about the Savannah Bananas, as it was announced on Friday afternoon that the Savannah Bananas will sponsor Matt DiBenedetto in this weekend's NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They are going to be televising a game on the CW as well, and Matt DiBenedetto will be able to throw the first pitch of the game. This is a really big deal. The Savannah Bananas, I believe, have never sponsored a NASCAR driver before, so this is a major sponsorship. They're a growing league. They have a lot of people who tune in. They were just actually at Busch Stadium recently, had some former St. Louis Cardinals players like Adam Wainwright come out, and I think it's pretty cool that they're going to be sponsoring Matt DiBenedetto at Indianapolis Motor Speedway this weekend in the Xfinity Series race. Maybe they could get Matt DiBenedetto that help to maybe have the pace and speed to contend. We'll see what happens. Nonetheless, really cool that Savannah Bananas will sponsor Matt DiBenedetto next weekend, or this weekend, at Indianapolis. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Joey Logano. Now, Joey Logano made his 600th career NASCAR Cup Series start this past weekend in Dover, finishing, I believe, inside the top 15. He is the youngest driver ever to reach 600 Cup Series starts, surpassing Richard Petty with 35 years, 1 month, and 26 days. Joey Logano has been breaking records in NASCAR competition. Of course, he is, I believe, still the youngest winner in NASCAR Cup Series history. He is one of the youngest three-time champions we've ever seen, and Joey Logano will go down as one of the best drivers in the history of the sport. Say what you want to say about his championships or whatever. To be the youngest driver to reach 600 Cup starts is incredible. I think there's definitely a chance, if he continues racing for another 6 or 7 years, that he could reach 1,000 NASCAR Cup starts, and I think it's very possible that he could end up doing that. Congrats to Logano on breaking that record and reaching that number. Pretty exciting stuff for Joey Logano. And now we're going ahead to on to the next story of today's episode, as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a sour note, as it was sadly announced on Friday afternoon that Rex White has sadly passed away at the age of 95 years old. Rex White, for those who don't know, won the 1960 NASCAR Cup Series championship and won 28 career NASCAR Cup Series races. I don't remember if he won any major races in his career, but he is tied with Carl Edwards on the all-time winless. Carl also has 28 career wins in this sport. Rex White is someone who is also known as a short king. My thoughts and condolences do go out to the White family during this tragic and sad time. One of the original goats of the sport back in the day in the early 1960s. Again, my thoughts and condolences do go out to the White family during this time. Rex White was 95 years old. Again, my prayers go out to the White family during this tragic and unfortunate time. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Connor Zilich. Now, Connor Zilich, we did the video on it yesterday or a couple days ago, but Connor Zilich picked up his 4th NASCAR Xfinity Series win of 2025. He has now 5 straight races that have been won by drivers with less than 50 starts in NASCAR Xfinity Series competition. Of course, Connor Zilich has won 3 of those 5 races, that being at Pocono, Sonoma, and Dover. Nick Sanchez, who picked up his first career win at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and Shaven Gisbergen, who won at the Chicago Street Course. I just want to say about Connor Zilich real quick. His numbers have been absolutely phenomenal over the course of the last 8 races. In the last 8 races, he has scored 8 straight top 5 finishes and has moved from 6th or 7th in the regular season standings, or like 12th or something like that, all the way up to 2nd. And I think he has a realistic chance, depending on how this goes. He could win more races by the end of this year, and he could absolutely go out there and win the championship. He's been better than Justin Allgaier in recent weeks, and he absolutely is the favorite right now to win the Xfinity Series race at Indianapolis this weekend. His numbers have been so incredible. They've been really fun to look at, and nonetheless, I think it's pretty incredible to see what Connor Zilich is doing currently at the moment. The competition, the caliber of the competition is really high, so to see him doing what he's doing is phenomenal. Congrats to him on having another win, and I think he'll be in Cup next year. He's one of the few prospects that I think is really good. He has figured this out really quickly. He's been so impressive, and he's been doing an exceptional and really good job in recent weeks, and has done an amazing job with Junior Motorsports recently. And now we're going ahead to on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ryan Preece. Now, over the weekend, Ryan Preece is competing in the New England 900 event that Cletus McFarland was putting up in the New England area. There were some notable drivers competing, of course, Cletus McFarland, and Gray Biffle was another notable driver who was competing in the event. And near the end of the race, it would come down between Ryan Preece and Gray Biffle for the overall win and the overall victory. And they had a really good battle near the end of the event, but Ryan Preece would come off the final corner and pick up the win at the New England 900. Ryan Preece had a very solid season, of course, in NASCAR competition, but for him to win the New England 900, I think that is a really big deal. To win one of Cletus McFarland's events, who could be in NASCAR potentially as early as next year, I think that is absolutely really good to see. I think Ryan is a really talented driver. He's shown it this year with RFK Racing, so to see him go out there and get it done, it's pretty cool to see. Congratulations to Ryan Preece on getting it done and picking up the overall win and victory in this year's New England 900. We'll see if he runs more races in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the IndyCar race from Toronto. Now, before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Dover Motor Speedway, the Toronto race took place for the IndyCar event. And this race was absolutely wild. You had a lot of wild strategies that were taking place during the event. It looked like early on that Alex Palou was going to be the odds-on favorite to win once again, but the cautions were coming out at a very untimely rate. And for a crash that happened for Jacob Abel and a big wreck that took place that took out Joseph Newgarden as well, this would bite him in the butt a little bit, unfortunately, because it came down pit road on lap 42 of the event, and basically that handed the lead to Pato O'Ward on the lead strategy at that particular point, because Rinus VeeKay and everyone would have to come down pit road. This would drop Alex Palou back outside of the top 10. Eventually, Alex Palou would fade back quite a bit to about 10th or 15th and would come across the line around 11th or 12th. Meanwhile, Pato O'Ward had a decent-sized lead over Rinus VeeKay, held him off in a hard-charging run, and a caution would come out for Felix Rosenqvist and Nolan Siegel. This would mean that coming out the final corner, Pato O'Ward was able to pick up a second win in the last three events and close in under 100 points on the championship. Pato O'Ward has been on a roll the last couple weeks. This 5 team has been really, really strong, and I think he's the only one, in my opinion, that could potentially be Alex Palou, but he's going to have to hope Alex Palou has another disastrous week like he had this weekend, which really wasn't all Alex Palou's fault, unfortunately. But nonetheless, congratulations to Pato O'Ward on picking up the win in Toronto. A big win for the team, a big win for that organization. The second Chevrolet win. We're starting to see more teams finally winning outside of, the Andretti team and the Ganassi team. So good for Pato. Congrats to him on picking up the win and victory in the Toronto race in IndyCar. A well-earned and well-deserved victory. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the ARCA race from Dover. Now, on Friday night, you had the ARCA race going on for Dover Motor Speedway as the Chicago Street Course announcement was coming out that they would not be returning for 2026. And this race would be dominated by one driver, and that, of course, is Brendan Butterbean Queen. Brendan Butterbean Queen has already won 3 races coming into this weekend. He had one at Kansas, he had one, I believe, at Daytona, and also picked up win earlier this year at, I believe, Michigan as well, if I'm not mistaken. And Brendan Butterbean Queen would lead flag to flag and come off the corner and pick up his 4th win of 2025. And the big news for this, too, is that a lot of the championship contenders had trouble and problems. Lost Allen had a tire issue. Brent Cruz, who I think is the only one that probably could have challenged. Also, Cannon Murphy was really good in this race. But Brent Cruz, in my opinion, was the only car that might have anything for that 28. He had a flat tire early in the event, and this really gave Brendan the insurance he needed to go out there and pick up the win and victory. So, congratulations, Brendan, on winning. When it was announced he'd be in this car this year, I became very excited because I am a pretty big fan of Brendan Butterbean Queen. He's also going to make his first Truck Series start in 2025 this weekend at Indianapolis Raceway Park, and I think he's got a really solid shot to win that race as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's in trucks next year with a team like Spire of how good he's been. I think he's ready to make that jump. I think he's made the cut to move up. Congratulations to him on winning the ARCA race at Dover. He absolutely earned this one. He earned the win, and he earned the victory. Good to see him go out there and get it done. He's really talented. He's really gifted, and good to see him pick up the win. He's doing what Connor Zilich did in that 28 car last year. Good to see him get it done and pick up the win with that team and organization. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the in-season tournament. Now, I haven't talked much about the in-season tournament since the first weekend because a lot of the fan favorites and a lot of the major contenders who we all thought were going to be in the final round of this event, like Kyle Larson, like Denny Hamill, like Tyler Reddick, for example, are not going to be competing in the final event. Instead, the final 2 drivers that are going to be competing in the in-season tournament are Ty Gibbs and 32 seed Ty Dillon. one of these two drivers will be getting $1 million in the final event at this year's Brickyard 400. I think what's so incredible for like Ty Dillon, for example, is giving him a chance and opportunity to get a spotlight in the sport. And I think he's been taking it and doing a fun job with the social media presence. And I think he's been taking it and having a lot of fun with it. And I think that's one thing about the in-season tournament I have liked this year is it's given a chance and opportunity for smaller teams to get the opportunity to get the spotlight on. You wouldn't normally give the spotlight on someone like a John Hunter Nemechek or give the spotlight on someone like a Ty Dillon, for example, most weeks. But these guys have been given the chance and opportunity to do that. Now, obviously, Ty Gibbs has been given a lot more of the spotlight, not because of the in-season tournament, but because he's been actually having a lot of speed over the last 6 or 7 weeks and is only 57 points outside the cutoff line. And realistically, with the speed they're showing, he's probably going to make the playoffs this year with the speed they've got right now. I think that Ty Gibbs has the advantage going into this race, but you never know. We didn't think Ty Dillon would make it this far. If Ty Gibbs has issues at Indy and Ty Dillon comes in and wins, it'd be pretty incredible. I want to see Ty Dillon do it and have the Cinderella upset, but I think that Ty Gibbs also has a really good chance at opportunity to do it because Ty Gibbs has been really, really good this year, and Ty Dillon's had some decent runs as of late, so we'll see what happens. I think Ty Gibbs is the favorite to win the in-season tournament on Sunday, depending on what happens with the weather, but we'll have to kind of wait and see. We'll see how things go, and we'll see if Ty Gibbs gets it done and picks up the win in victory in the in-season tournament. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Will Power. Now, there has been a lot of talk and conversations surrounding Will Power's future in IndyCar past the 2025 season. Why? Well, Will Power is currently in a contract year with Team Penske right now at this moment, and there has been quite a bit of chatter in the industry that many think that Will Power may not return to Team Penske in 2026, and many have brought it up, and other reporters have brought it up as well. They have heard that there is a potential landing spot for Will Power to go to Aaron McLaren in 2026. So Bob Pockers of Fox Sports went over and actually asked Zach Brown about what the plans are for the Aaron McLaren team next year, and are they planning to bring Will Power over to the team next year? Well, Zach Brown did confirm that Will Power will not be joining the Aaron McLaren team in 2026, and is expected to keep the same 3-car lineup for next year. That means that Nolan Siegel will continue driving the number 6, Pat O'Ward, who will of course sign a multi-year extension with the team, will continue driving the number 5, and we will see Christian Lundgaard back in the number 7 next year, and there is a potential possibility we could see a 4th car at the Indy 500, maybe perhaps like Kyle Busch, if Kyle Busch gets a chance and opportunity to do it. We'll have to kind of wait and see on that front. But at this point for Will Power, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, Will Power be back with the organization and team over at Team Penske next season, or will Will Power go to another team potentially next year? Because Will Power, one, is a little bit older at this point. I think Will Power is like 41 or 42, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. But Will Power also has been around at Team Penske for many, many years. And I think that Dave Malukas is absolutely very, very talented. But also the Team Penske team this year has absolutely been a disaster. They've had a terrible year so far. They had a solid run in the first race at Iowa, but then, of course, the second race went absolutely horrendously for the team, and the team has been up and down in 2025. They just have not had a lot of good races this year, and when they're having things go right, something normally goes wrong for the program. So I can't really blame Will Power for the bad runs, but he's also had a lot of aggression and has taken a lot of frustration out on a lot of people so far in 2025. And I think a lot of people blame him for the frustration on knowing truly what his future is currently at the moment past this season. It's disappointing to see that he may not be back with the program of Team Penske, but we know he ain't going to Aaron McLaren. The problem is there's such a limited amount of spots. Could we see a driver swap, or maybe he goes to AJ Foyt Racing? Well, maybe we see Dave Malukas go there. I think that certainly is a possibility, and I think that would be an interesting thing to kind of look at this point. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens, but as of right now, Will Power, we know for sure, will not be joining Aaron McLaren, but we don't really know at this particular moment of point where he's going to end up going. We'll see what happens throughout the remainder of the year and remainder of the silly season, where he could end up in the not-so-distant future. Now we're going to head on to the next story in today's episode as we're talking about Aric Almirola. As it was confirmed on Saturday evening that Aric Almirola will be back in the number 19 car for Joe Gibbs Racing this weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Aric Almirola did confirm in a statement that this was going to be happening. Now, Aric Almirola so far in 2025 has had a really solid season in NASCAR Xfinity Series competition. He has scored quite a few top fives, including a second place finish most recently at at Dover Motor Speedway, getting held up by Connor Zilich at the end, with Connor picking up the win. And then, of course, he has one race so far this year, that, of course, being at the most recent race at Phoenix earlier in the season. And that, so far, is the only win for Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025 in NASCAR Xfinity Series competition. Eric Amarola, in my opinion, comes into this weekend as one of the odds-on favorites. Last year in this event, he was really strong and really fast, and that car was exceptional. He ran top 5 and top 10 all day, led a ton of laps, and was actually leading the race on the white flag of the event before Riley Hurts made an impressive dive bomb move to the inside to pick up the lead and pick up the victory. And he had finishing second or third in the event at the end of the day. I really think Eric Amarola has to come in, like I said, in this weekend as one of the odds-on favorites, but he also got to look at those junior motorsports cars. They have been absolutely strong in recent weeks, and I think Amarola has been doing a very strong job in that car, but I think it's going to be tough to beat the junior motorsports car. They are so good right now, 11 wins for the organization. I think it's very realistic to think that they're going to get their 100th win this weekend, and I think they do make history this weekend more than likely at Indy. So we'll see what happens, but I'm glad to see Eric Amarola back behind the wheel. I know a lot of people don't like Eric Amarola for things that have happened behind the scenes, including the fight with Bubba Wallace, but I think Eric is someone who's still very good in Xfinity competition. He's probably going to make a career in the series at this point. Congrats on Amarola getting another opportunity with the team. We'll see how he does this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I think he's got a great chance and a strong opportunity to go out there and pick up the win in victory. We'll see how he ends up performing, and we'll see how he ends up doing this weekend at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now we're going to head to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, this past weekend at Dover Motor Speedway, we saw a new tire that came out this weekend. There was no testing for it, and of course, there was no practice and qualifying due to the unfortunate weather patterns that came near the racetrack this past weekend. And many drivers were asked about how was the tire for this weekend. Well, Kyle Larson was one of the first that was asked this question about how did you feel about the tire. Well, Kyle Larson says that he didn't know the difference in the tire from prior years and what we've seen in past races at Dover Motor Speedway. Now, let's talk about the racing itself real quick, because we'll talk about the aero blocking side of things also a little bit later, something Kyle Busch said over the weekend. But we saw the tires, right? And I think in stage number 1, there was an opportunity to see that the tires matter at least a little bit. You had the opportunity to see quite a few passes. I think stage 1 was actually the most interesting and intricate part of the race, because you had a lot of guys in the back of the field that were moving toward the front. But as the rubber got onto the racetrack, and once the rubber did fall off the racetrack as well, the tires really did not matter that much. Just to put this in perspective, Denny Hamill on 75 to 80 lap old tires was able to hold off a guy who had 60 lap fresher tires than him and put on the fastest lap of the race, nearly 80 laps after he put on new tires. There is no reason that a driver on nearly 80 lap old tires was able to get the fastest lap of the race. That is unacceptable. And that's a big reason why I'm not a big fan of the aero and the dirty air on this race car. I've been against it for quite some time, and there's way too much dirty air on these next-gen cars, and it absolutely needs to be worked on because, again, this is air. It's not the tires, it's the air. There's so much dirty air on this next-gen car. It's very blatant. You can see that here at Dover. It's very frustrating watching because Chris Bell was clearly faster than Denny Hamill at the end of the race, and it was clearly faster than guys like Larson were quicker than Chase Elliott at the end, but they couldn't get by them because the tires, again, don't matter when you have so much air behind these cars. There's so much dirty air, and the air deficiencies on this car are absolutely ridiculous at this point. And I truly believe they've absolutely got to work on that because no reason, again, that there should be so many dirty air efficiencies and issues. But again, it's going to be something we're going to be talking about for quite some time until they fix this car. And I don't know if they're going to fix this car at this point because NASCAR probably likes what they're seeing at this point. So not a big fan of the dirty air deficiencies, but I'm not shocked and surprised to see Larson say this because in my opinion, the tire really didn't matter with the amount of aero that is behind this race car. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cam Waters. Now, Cam Waters recently at the Lion Rock Truck Series race about 3 weeks ago competed in the event, and despite running a lot of day around 10th or 15th, actually salvaged a solid finish scoring a top 5 run in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series event. Now, recently an article that Speed Cafe actually put out, he says that he wants to see the Truck Series race at Australia, not like the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series perhaps, but wants to see a Truck Series form in Australia. He'd like to see like a third tertiary series come down and race her and would like to see it form. He feels like it would be a great opportunity to showcase that kind of racing in Australia. Now, the big question you have to ask yourself, would you do it on a lot of road courses or would you have it on a lot of dirt tracks? Because the big issue for Australia, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of people from Australia can comment on this, I don't think Australia has a lot of oval racetracks. Sure, they have the Calder Park that NASCAR ran there in the late 1980s, and they have a lot of dirt ovals out there, but outside of that, you don't have a lot of traditional ovals at this point. But it would be very interesting to see like a third tertiary series and an opportunity to see that kind of racing down there, because I think that when you look at supercar racing in general, I think the racing down there has actually been getting better this year from what I've seen so far this year, and I think a lot of drivers who haven't had as much success could go down there and have a lot of fun and race in like an exhibition events, like a Jack Perkins who's going to run in Portland, like maybe Cam Waters goes down and runs a couple races. What about Will Brown runs an exhibition truck series event? What about like a Brody Kostecki, for example? What about SVG going down there if he gets the opportunity, if they form the series doing a one-off there? What about maybe some NASCAR drivers going down and racing there if the truck series for once goes there? Because I know there's a lot of talk about expanding and racing in Australia, considering that there has been a major Australian and New Zealand growth in NASCAR. I think that could be something that would be really, really fun, in my opinion, is a potential opportunity there for some sort of crossover for the series if that something like that could end up taking place. It'd be very interesting for sure, and honestly, I kind of want to see NASCAR get to Australia in the future again, like they did back in the late 1980s. I think they had a lot of success doing that kind of stuff, and again, I think it'd be pretty fascinating to see something like that where NASCAR got the chance and opportunity to race in Australia once again. So we'll see if that happens in the future, but I love that he's talking about that. I want to see the expansion. I want to see more NASCAR into that area, so I think going to Australia would be really, really big for the sport. We'll see if that happens, and we'll see if maybe down the road, if NASCAR does in fact head to Australia in the not so distant future, or if we see some of our sort of Australian series being run in the events. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Richard Childress. Now, Richard Childress Racing, we know, has had some struggles in the NASCAR Cup Series over the course of the last couple of years. And Richard Childress, for the first time in quite some time, actually finally admitted that they've got to work on the race cars at the team. After Kyle scored a finish just outside of the top 10, he says that the team needs to get better race cars and they need to start working on making the cars a lot better over at Richard Childress Racing. Now, look, Richard Childress Racing really has not been a relevant team in quite some time. Sure, they had a lot of success after, unfortunately, Dale Earnhardt's passing. Kevin Harvick came into the program in 2001, and really up until 2013, they actually had quite a bit of success. But outside of some years during that time, this team really has not been a championship caliber team since 2013. And they contended with the championship with Ryan Newman in the 2014 season. And yes, he had a solid year and was actually really consistent, say what you want to say. But really, let's be real and honest, Ryan Newman should not have probably been contending for that championship and should not have probably made the Final Four that year. Yes, he would have been in the top 8 of the points, I believe, by the end, but he just didn't have the consistent pace and speed to be a major, major factor. But I absolutely think he needs to get these cars better. And in my opinion, I've said this for a while, I think Austin Dillon should give up the driving seat and someone younger needs to go into the program. Let's talk about Roush, for example. Roush is basically in the same position for many, many years. They were on decline around 2013 to 2014. They were losing drivers like Matt Kenseth, Greg Biffle, and Carl Edwards, and replacing them with younger guys, and the team has really suffered, unfortunately, because of that. So I think that when they brought Brad Keselowski in, if you've noticed, the team has improved quite a bit, and they've been a lot better. All three drivers have shown a lot of speed at that team. And yeah, I think the smartest thing they could do is let Austin Dillon retire at the end of next year, because we know Austin Dillon is going to be back in that car in 2026. It has been confirmed. But I think the smartest thing they could do is maybe, get Austin Dillon to retire for a year and then let Kyle Busch, if he stays with the team, stick around and make that program a lot better. I think you need younger people to go into the program to make that team better, because right now where they're at, their long-term future, they're not in the best state. They're not in the best position right now, and the organization just is suffering because of it. They had one solid start to the year in 2023, and they've fallen off a cliff ever since. So they've got to get the cars better over there. They've been struggling this year, and they've got some work to do. Yes, Kyle Busch is getting that car really good finishes, but they're not generally having the best races out there. So the team, they've got to show some improvement. They're not really running fantastic currently at the moment, and I think there's a lot of work that definitely needs to be done with that team, and they do need to get some progress made on that organization, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Our Motorsports. As it was announced and confirmed earlier this weekend that Our Motorsports has officially ceased operations effective immediately after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Dover. Kaz Grala drove in the final race. Of course, it was announced earlier this week that Chris Wright would not be returning to the Our Motorsports organization. And after it was confirmed, I believe it was on Friday afternoon, it would be confirmed that Our Motorsports would be ceasing operations effective immediately. Now, long term, we could see Our Motorsports return if they do get a lot of funding and a lot of sponsorship. But as of right now, the team has unfortunately ceased operations and they're no longer existing in this sport. For Our Motorsports, I think a lot of people are instantly going to blame Chris Wright. And yeah, I think Chris Wright does deserve some blame for the unfortunate demise of this organization. You can't have a guy in your race car that is destroying as much equipment as Chris Wright was destroying. I mean, Chris Wright in the first 3 races destroyed a ton of equipment. He had an engine failure during the test at Rockingham, if I remember correctly. That's not really his fault. And then he just a lot of times ran off the pace, and he just was not that good in the car. But the reason they brought Chris Wright in the first place of the team is because of the financial struggles that organization was having. They lost Anthony Alfredo at the end of last year, which Anthony decided to leave the team at the end of last year to go to another organization. He went to Young's Motorsports and is having a lot more success over at Young's than he's been having than we've been seeing with the Our Motorsports team. And I think it sucks to see an organization shut down. You don't want to see a team shut down, considering just a few years ago, this team had 3 cars. They had a 3-car team with Anthony Alfredo, Jeb Burton, I believe another driver named Brett Moffitt drove for the program, all in the same season. But then they downsized a 1-car team, I think in 2024. They had Anthony Alfredo behind the wheel of the car. And then in 2025, they did what they, 22, I think they won the pole at Portland that year with Anthony Alfredo. They had a 3-car team, then they downsized, and then it's just been a struggle for that team and that program. And they brought Chris Wright in, and you knew that there probably wasn't going to be a lot of success. I don't think anybody should have been shocked and surprised to see the lack of success from the team, considering they brought Chris Wright in. Chris Wright, no disrespect, he is not a good driver. I know people talk about comparing him to Hailie Deegan. I think Hailie Deegan's a better race car driver, considering she actually won a few races in the ARCA West series. Yes, I know ARCA West isn't the most competitive, but she still won in there. And I think you look at that team, it's just not shocking to see this happen when they're having financial issues and financial problems. It's a shame to see them go, though. I wish they were still around in the sport. But as of right now, they're no longer existing at the moment. Again, I still think down the road this team could potentially return. I'd love to see them return in the future in the sport. But as of this particular moment and in this particular point, they're not going to be racing anymore. There's just going to be one less team on the grid. Helps a team like Joey Gates Motorsports when you have less cars out there, so they can probably make the field a lot easier. And if these extra teams come in and race like Junior Motorsports and they decide to run more races, then maybe they'll be able to have an opportunity to get a lot easier. But as of right now, it's the end for Our Motorsports, which is unfortunate and disappointing to see nonetheless. But it's not shocking, surprising, considering all the financial struggles that team was having at this particular moment. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Berry and Carson Hosvar. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race about a week or so ago at Sonoma Raceway, you saw the incident that happened on the racetrack between Josh Berry and Carson Hosvar. So on the white flag, or a couple laps ago in the event, Josh Berry was actually having a really good run at Sonoma, and Carson Hosvar, who was unfortunately, I believe, a lap down at one point in this race. They got that car actually fixed, and he was running around 10th place in the race. But then all of a sudden, going up, I believe, in turn number 2 or turn number 3, going up the banking into corners, Josh Berry would actually turn Carson Hosvar, and honestly, it looks really, really intentional. And Josh Berry actually spoke about this incident this past weekend in the media center. He said that he did not do that intentionally. He called it hard racing at that point, and he said he did not intentionally mean to run into Carson Hosvar and end up spinning him out. And Josh Berry actually tried to reach out to Carson Hosvar, according to what he said, to apologize for what happened, but he never got a response back from Carson Hosvar for what had happened on the racetrack. And then, of course, he called Luke Lambert Lambert and other people involved in that incident to try to explain his side and what happened on the racetrack. Carson Hosvar also offered his own response to what happened there, and he basically was a little surprised to see that Josh Berry had gotten into him. He thought Josh Berry would not be the one that got in him. He thought it'd be someone that was already mad at him, like, I don't know, a couple guys like Ross Chastain were already frustrated with him, guys like Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who have been not big fans of Carson Hosvar in recent weeks. He thought it'd be someone like that would get into him and not Josh Berry. And Carson Hosvar also responded and said as well that he is not a fan of making calls after the day after an incident happens on the racetrack, and he doesn't feel like he needs to apologize for a lot of incidents that happen on the racetrack. And honestly, I think for Carson Hosvar, if you don't really do something that I think is overegregious, I don't think you should have to call a driver. I don't disagree on that front. However, there is definitely some drivers that Carson Hosvar has definitely made upset in the sport. And I've said this for a long time. Carson Hosvar, I think, has a ton of talent at this moment. He is someone who's really, really good and has a lot of potential. The problem is right now is that a lot of the issues with Carson is not how talented he is, but how over-aggressive of a driver he can be. And that has unfortunately cost Carson Hosvar a lot of really good opportunities. You think in Mexico City, what he did to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was not necessary in my opinion. I think that was way, way too over-aggressive for Carson Hosvar to run the Ricky Stenhouse Jr. concern. He did that in just a couple weeks prior at National Super Speedway. And I think that was absolutely inexcusable on Carson Hosvar's part to do what he did to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And I think a lot of what happened in Atlanta was fair play at this point. But I think that there's a reason why a lot of people in the industry don't like Carson Hosvar. There's a lot of drivers that are not fans of him, and a lot of drivers don't like the kind of aggressive driving style that Carson Hosvar has. And it's kind of like Ross Chastain. A lot of drivers in the sport, they've grown up to like Ross Chastain now, but a lot of drivers weren't the biggest fans of Ross Chastain a couple years back. Kyle Larson wasn't the biggest fan of him. Christopher Bell wasn't the biggest fan. But I think that if you get basically, I get he's not a fan of the phone calls, and he said nothing changes at this point, but I think sometimes when Carson Hosvar says something, I do get a little frustrated at times because I think it's a little bit of wake-up call for him and a little bit of reality check for Carson because the guy, I think, is really talented. I think he's super, super good. He can race a race car. I don't think there's any denying it. I don't think there's any question about that. But sometimes I think he can be a little bit in over his head in these situations. And to me, when I look at this case and situation with Josh Berry, right? Yeah, Josh Berry absolutely was at fault, but he was trying to reach out and clear the air about what had happened on the racetrack. The problem is I don't think Carson Hosvar completely understood that. I think that that's why there's so much frustration from a lot in the garage because, like, okay, you're not going to accept the phone call. I get that not a lot of people are a big fan of the phone calls, and I get that he wants to do his own thing, and I completely respect that, right? But at the same time, you've got a lot of drivers who are ready to hang up and go after Carson at this point and just wreck him at this point and take him out of contention in these situations because of the over-aggressive driving that he has shown and the uncariness that he's put on recently. So we'll see what happens with Carson in the future and see if there's any retaliation from him. I would not expect Carson to retaliate against Josh Berry. I just don't think he'll do that right now. But I think that over-aggressiveness is going to affect him in a really big way down the road, and I think that's going to hurt him in the not-so-distant future. So he's got to calm down at this point because he's got a lot of people that are frustrated with him, and I hope he can not learn because he's not the one at fault this time, but I think that he's going to get involved in more trouble incidents, and he realizes because he's been involved in a lot of controversy at just a young age of 22 years old. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson versus David Gravel. Now, if you watched the race for the World of Owls event on the night before the Bing Kings Royal took place on Friday night, there was a controversial situation between Kyle Larson and David Gravel. Now, David Gravel already had a rough weekend. Unfortunately, had a massive crash incident that took place on Thursday night. And then, of course, on Wednesday, he was disqualified during the high limit event. Well, Kyle Larson and David Gravel were battling for third position in the final podium spot in the event, and they were throwing sliders back in front. They were making really aggressive moves. David Gravel threw a slider at Kyle Larson at one point. Larson gave it back to him coming to the white flag of the event and got by David Gravel to finish in third place. After it had concluded, David Gravel, for some reason, was upset and frustrated at Kyle Larson and dumped him after the race had concluded. And Kyle Larson really had nowhere to go. Now, Kyle Larson threw some, not like punches, but I think, was a little bit upset with Gravel. And Gravel came back over after that happened and basically was throwing a little bit of gestures at Kyle Larson after the incident. Then they both spoke to the media, and Kyle Larson said, "I straight up beat him at the end of the day." And then David Gravel came in and said, "You want to throw sliders and be that aggressive? We can play that game." He's out of full-time driver coming in and racing in the series, and we can play that game if we want to. Then there were some tweets that surfaced between Kyle Larson and David Gravel. I thought Kyle Larson's tweet honestly was really funny. He said, we're just discussing the contracts for 2027. Then he can basically come in and race against a bunch of real drivers and really talented drivers in the sport. Then David Gravel had his response after this incident. I feel like this was a really childish response from David Gravel by blaming Kyle Larson for a lot of the big wrecks that happened at Eldora Speedway. Basically saying, maybe that you should learn about racing with respect, considering a bunch of your drivers got hurt this week at the racetrack. And basically, a lot of all that stuff said, oh, we'll learn about that. It's for 2027. That's going to be really, really good. I think you can clearly see here that David Gravel is a little jealous of Kyle Larson's success. I think he's seen what Larson's been doing in dirt racing, how he's had a ton of success in the sport. And David Gravel, of course, is competing in the World of Outlaws currently at the moment. And if you ask me which series has more talent right now between the High Limit Series and the World of Outlaws, I'm going to say the High Limit Series. Unbiasedly, I think the High Limit Series has a lot better competition. Rico Bruce over there. Brad Sweet's over there. You've got guys, of course, like Aaron Reitzel, who was over World of Outlaws, who's joined up with the High Limit Series. Danny Dietrich has been making starts in High Limit as of late. You got, I think, more better competition in High Limit currently at the moment. As far as David Gravel spinning Kyle Larson after the race is over, I really don't understand what he was thinking there. I think that was pretty inexcusable from David Gravel, and I think he knows better at this point not to do that. But they both spoke to the officials, and David Gravel once again getting benefited from the World of Outlaws people, because the World of Outlaws people, they showed the interview of David Gravel on the main page on X, but they didn't show the interview for Kyle Larson. I think the World of Outlaws is a little jealous of Kyle Larson at this point, because again, Kyle Larson is definitely doing things better over at High Limit right now. They're getting a lot better purses. As far as I'm concerned with the blaming Larson for the injuries that happened this week in Eldora, blaming Kyle Larson for that is ridiculous. I don't really understand why he's blaming Larson for all the injuries. Yeah, let's blame Kyle Larson for multiple injuries that happened this week in Eldora. Let's not blame the track and the track prep that took place this weekend, where unfortunately a couple of drivers had really serious injuries. But to blame Kyle Larson for that, to see David Gravel blame him for that, I just didn't really understand that. I think that was a little childish from David Gravel to do that. And you could tell by the responses that a lot of people were kind of tired of the blame game from David Gravel. They're tired of the complaining from him. It's just because it's a lot of complaining at this point, and there's a lot of frustration. Because I get David Gravel's probably frustrated at the fact that, look, the High Limit Series is probably doing better than what we're doing at the World of Outlaws right now. And I don't think they're doing fantastic. I mean, they're on Dirt Vision. You have to pay more money for a Dirt Vision subscription than you do for Flow Racing subscription. Flow Racing get more racing on there than you do with Dirt Vision currently at the moment. Maybe World of Outlaws went over to I don't know, the Flow Racing, they probably grow a little bit. Just saying. Nonetheless, definitely interesting beef for sure. Larson sees no hard feelings between him. He said that this weekend. And I don't really think there should be hard feelings, but I think David Gravel got a little upset that Kyle Larson's beating him straight up, and he didn't like getting beat by Kyle Larson straight up, in my opinion. Now we're going to head jump on to the next story in today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch and his thoughts on error blocking. So, coming this weekend, we all knew there was a really good chance and strong possibility that error blocking was going to be a major factor, because Dover is one of those tracks that is a major factor when it comes to error blocking and dirty air, among other things as well. And a lot of drivers were asked over the weekend about a lot of the issues when it comes to error blocking. And one driver that had a major opinion on this was, of course, Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch basically said, when he's asked this question, says that the driver should choose either the spotter or the rear view camera. He says you can't have both. He says you can either have the spotter, but if you have the spotter, you cannot have the rear view camera. Or you can have the rear view camera behind you, but you cannot have a spotter. And basically this is because of the error blocking issues with these next-gen cars. I think Kyle Busch's comments are absolutely certainly interesting, right? Because we have seen a lot of the error deficiencies, of course, with this next-gen car, and a lot of the error blocking issues that have come into play. And I think Kyle Busch brings up a pretty interesting point, saying that if you want to basically have that rear view camera, you basically cannot go out there and have a spotter. I think a spotter is more important than a rear view camera. And personally, if I had to choose between having the rear view camera and having, of course, the opportunity to have a spotter, I'd rather have a spotter, because I think a spotter is more important than basically having the rear view camera at this point. But I think there is one easy solution that could really come into play, is just finding a way to get rid of all this dirty air on this next-gen car. I'm sorry, you're telling me we cannot find a way to have to trail the car in front of us. You can look at the Xfinity Series, for example. The Racing Xfinity Series, I think we all agree, is definitely a lot better currently at the moment right now than the Cup Series is at this moment. The racing in the Cup Series is just not that good at the moment right now at a lot of these tracks. And I get Dover is a track that historically hasn't put on the best racing. I think the Xfinity race, for example, this weekend was not that great if you were to ask me. But I think it definitely could have been a lot better for sure as we got more opportunity to see how the racing went. But Dover also is one of those tracks that I think is very aero sensitive. And you also, if you have a single lane that has the opportunity to make moves, like a track like Dover's, for example, I really think that there you can see a lot of those aero deficiencies that are really come into play. And I think it's definitely frustrating for sure as a fan, right? Because you look at the racing like even 10 or 15 years ago, and we all can agree that the racing at times can be better than it was 10 or 15 years ago, but also the racing back then was definitely a little bit better. But I really wish that we could get this car fixed because we're still having the same aero issues we were having 3 years ago. We're having all these aero issues in 22, and we still haven't resolved the problem. At this point, NASCAR needs to stop playing around. They talked about adding horsepower to the car. I think we need to try to add more horsepower because I think that could actually make some upgrades, making less aero deficiency. If you have more horsepower, you have the opportunity for the tires to wear quite a bit more than they did this past weekend. And I think then you have the opportunity to make the racing a lot better. But is NASCAR going to be willing to do that? Are they wanting to do it? They've discussed about doing it. They've discussed going up to 750. I don't think 750 is going to be fully enough, but I think it will make a little bit of a difference to make the racing a little bit better. Because we've seen the racing when we did the 750 package, like the short tracks, for example, the racing there was actually all right. Those 750 races at like Dover, for example, I don't remember if they had 550 for that race or not, but if they did, the racing here just wasn't great in 2021, even though Hendrick completely flat out dominated. And the fact that guys like Chase Elliott, clearly faster cars, couldn't get up there, that was really frustrating for me. And it just made, again, I think that Dover itself, the track, it's fine in my opinion, but I think you can definitely tell that aero is a major, major issue with this car. It needs to be resolved. I really hope NASCAR can just figure out what they're going to do. They've got to at some point look at like the horsepower side of things. I think that's the big thing they have to look at this point because you can't just keep making aero changes. They got to look at adding horsepower. I really hope they're talking about it and they're discussing it at this point because I think they got to look at finding a way to add horsepower to this next-gen car because until then, I don't think the racing is going to be great. I think it's going to continue suffering, unfortunately, and NASCAR just needs to do it, and they're probably going to lose fans at this point. Some, of course, are going to stick around. I'll be a fan for as long as I can be, but until then, there got to be some major changes with this car. I really hope those changes come into play. I do agree they have to choose between a camera. I really think the rear view camera has to go at this point, but I also think at the same time, just get the car better for the aero because then you won't have to rely so much on the camera, and therefore the racing probably can be a lot better, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about the Chicago Street Course. Now, we did a video covering the story on the channel on Friday, but it was officially announced and confirmed on Friday late afternoon during the ARCA race that the Chicago Street Course will not be returning to the NASCAR Cup Series schedule in 2026. They released a statement earlier this week confirming this, basically saying we're going to be hitting pause on the race for 2026 as we look to pursue for another area of the schedule for 2027. So they're not saying that the Chicago Street Course is completely off for the long term, but as of right now, they will not be returning for the 2026 year. Now, like I mentioned just a second ago, there is still a potential possibility that the Chicago Street Course could be returning in 2027. But the big reason why I think this event is not coming back in 2026 is because of one crucial thing. NASCAR wanted the event to be on the 4th of July weekend. The problem is the city of Chicago was not wanting that to happen because they were having a lot of congestion with law enforcement, and they're also having a lot of stuff going on in the city around that time. And they feel like, especially with certain parts of the area getting clogged up by the NASCAR event taking place down there, they felt like there wasn't a really good reason to continue doing this. This definitely is really unfortunate news that the Chicago Street Course will not be returning, because I'm going to be real and honest, I actually was a pretty big fan of this event. I actually liked the event itself. I was skeptical originally of this event a couple years back, but I think the first 2 years, despite all the weather issues and the weather stuff that's happened, I think it's actually been a really big positive for the city, and there's been jobs that have been opened up in the area, and we've also been able to create a lot of new fans in the sport. I think there's actually been a lot more interest in sport around the Chicago area. But the last year, there just wasn't as much going on. Yes, you didn't really have weather issues this time, but you had not as much going on. They only had one person in the concert, that being Zach Brown Band. They took away a lot of certain things. They didn't really have in the Lollapalooza area. It just didn't feel as grand this year, and also TNT's coverage was just not very good in 2025. So that was not shocking and surprising to see. So I'm disappointed to hear the news of Chicago not coming back, but I'm also not surprised. Many were expecting this event was not going to be coming back for 2026. And again, it could come back 2027, but we'll have to kind of wait and see on that front. But now the big questions surround what happens for 2026 on the schedule. What about the replacement? Well, according to reports, it sounds like, we talked about this earlier this week, but NASCAR is expected to head to San Diego in 2026. And Kelly Crandall actually reported last night during the NASCAR Cup Series race that it's been confirmed, and it sounds like the Chicago Street Course replacement is going to be San Diego, and they are going to be headed to the Coronado Naval Base, according to what she has reported, and according to her, an announcement is expected on a couple days from now on Wednesday, July 23rd. I don't know exactly what time it's going to be. I've heard a big announcement is coming on July 23rd, so I'm thinking that San Diego announcement is going to take place then. I think NASCAR going out to San Diego is actually a really, really big deal, because one thing you have to look at is the Southern California market. NASCAR has not really been in the Southern California market and has not had a points-paying race in the Southern California market since 2023. Yes, they had the Busch Clash at the Los Angeles Coliseum in 2024, but in 2023, it was the last time they raced at a race in Southern California, and that was at Auto Club Speedway. And with them putting pause on the Auto Club short track at the moment, NASCAR, I think, wants to focus on trying to get a street course race down in that area. Now, of course, the Coronado Naval Base is interesting timing for that. Now, the big question is, when will that race take place? If you're having a race on a naval base, I guarantee you that more than likely that race is going to take place on the 4th of July weekend. That's the only thing that makes sense at this point, because why would you have it moved to a naval base and then not have it on the 4th of July? That doesn't make sense. I think what is certainly interesting, though, about that, like, again, the San Diego race, I'm very excited about that. I think that is going to be a really, really fun and exciting event. And once that does get finalized and confirmed, which again, it is expected to be announced in the coming weeks, days, it is going to be officially announced and confirmed that they are going to be racing there, which I think is really exciting, right? Because I think that you look at, like I said, the Southern California market. They need to be in that area. It's a big market for the country. You need to be in those big markets. Now, the other big question is, what does this mean for the Chicago area? Well, I do believe we are going to be racing Chicagoland next year. I think NASCAR does not want to leave the Chicago market. They want to stay in that market for the 2026 year. And I think they're going to be racing in Chicago. And there's been a lot of increased chatter in recent weeks. Apparently from some people that reported, like Jared had talked about on his channel, he's heard that there have been people that have been coming in and out of the racetrack. There's been videos that have been surfacing, and they've been updating the area as of recent weeks, and they're starting to get the track set up. It is going to take a couple months for the track to be ready to go, but I think that they'll have the track ready in time. But the big question is, if you're going to be having it on the 4th of July weekend, when would Chicagoland take place? It'd probably be later in the year. It'd have to think like August or September, right? Could it be like a playoff date potentially? I think that would be interesting for sure, but then you're going to be running into the same issues you had if you had it like that time a couple years back, where it might be a little cooler, but also you might have issues running up with the NFL around that time. And there's also been rumors about a repave coming as well, which I honestly don't want to see that. I want to see at least 1 or 2 races at the old surface, because the next gen car, in my opinion, no disrespect to the Chicago Street Course, but I think Chicagoland absolutely put on a much better show and a much better product than the Chicago Street Course was, because the next gen car absolutely races amazing and fantastic on the intermediate tracks currently at this particular moment. So we'll see what happens down there. Again, it is disappointing here that the Chicago Street Course will not be returning for next year, but it's not also the most shocking and surprising thing. As of right now, we also know Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be the favorite to win that San Diego race next year, and he's the king of the Chicago Street Course. He's the king of that track, and he'll be known as the best driver ever in Chicago Street Course history with 4 wins across 5 events. Of course, he won 2 Xfinity Series races and 2 Cup Series races at the track, and now we'll try to go to San Diego and become the king of that track next year. So we'll see how things go for next year, but as of right now, it's in for Chicago. I think they could come back in 2027, but we'll see what happens with the NASCAR schedule. We should be getting that pretty soon, with more starting to get announced and confirmed about it. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about the 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports lawsuit once again. Now, it was confirmed earlier this week on Thursday that 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports are currently open teams at this particular moment in point, as they were not granted their temporary restraining order. They want a temporary restraining order so they can compete as charter teams until the ruling on the preliminary injunction goes through. Now, there is still a chance and possibility that 2311 and Front Row could still get their charters back depending on what the judge rules on when it comes to the preliminary injunction. But for this week in Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Brickyard 400, 2311 and Front Row are going to be open teams. Those open teams are as stated. It will be Tyler Reddick in the 45, Bubba Wallace in the 23, Riley Herbst in the 35, Noah Grace in the 4 for Front Row Motorsports, Todd Gillen in the 34, and Zane Smith in the 38 car. All 6 of these cars, depending on what happens with the weather for this weekend, all 6 of these cars will have to qualify in on time if we have more than 40 cars. And currently at the moment, there are only 2 other open entries that have been confirmed. Catherine Lake is going to drive the 78 for Live Fast Motorsports, and Josh Wilkie is going to drive the 66 for Garage 66. And I would not be surprised if there's at least 1 or 2 more teams that do get confirmed for this year's Brickyard 400. But over the weekend, both Denny Hamill and Tyler Reddick actually spoke on the situation over at the organization and team, because Tyler Reddick, there's a lot of questions surrounding what is going to happen to Reddick past this year. Well, Tyler Reddick does not have a comment at this time on what his future is looking like at the moment right now, and doesn't truly know what his future is going to be looking like past 2025, depending on what happens. Then Denny Hamill spoke about this, and Denny Hamill says that come December 1st to the trial, he said, mark your calendars and make sure you're at there, because he says everything is going to end up getting revealed at this trial, and you'll get to hear a lot of the details, and a lot of things are going to get exposed. The fact that Denny Hamill says that probably tells me that they have been doing a lot of discovery, because currently NASCAR and 2011 and Front Row are in the discovery phase at this particular moment in point. And I have to think that they have probably discovered a lot of things that have been happening in NASCAR behind the scenes. So at this particular moment, I think a lot of people are probably coming out and saying that they probably should go to some sort of mediation at this point and go there in August. But Denny Hamill did confirm, speaking to the media yesterday or a couple days ago, he said they're not planning to go to mediation at this point. They're planning to go through the whole entire lawsuit and go all the way. NASCAR has recently stated that they've actually been open to some sort of having mediation and having some sort of settlement so they can settle this lawsuit at this point. And Judge Kenneth Bell stated publicly that he wants to basically have this settled at this point and not go to trial fully. But he says if you want to go fully to trial, we can absolutely fully go to trial at this point. Now, in my opinion, talking about this lawsuit, I think that both sides do have an interesting point. With the open side of things for 2311 and Front Row, we'll have to wait and see what happens with the preliminary injunction. But NASCAR has told the judge multiple times that they do not plan to sell the charters until the preliminary injunction is ruled on. Now, 2311 Racing and Front Row do get their preliminary injunction. All the stuff about Tyler Reddick being a free agent will not matter until the end of the season, because if they get a preliminary injunction, they will be able to keep their charters. And I also would not expect NASCAR to appeal it. We're so far late in the year that it's going to probably take a few weeks and at least a few months for sure for that to be heard. And then at that point, you're looking at that. But NASCAR has told the court they're probably looking to sell, and I think there's definitely a lot of teams that are interested in expanding currently at the moment. I look at Legacy Motor Club. They want to be a 3-car team going into next year. They're in a lawsuit with Ricker Racing and TJ Pusher currently at the moment right now for a 3rd charter going into next year. Ricker Racing and TJ Pusher, like I mentioned, they're wanting to be a 3-car team in the future. RFK Racing, who's caught up in this situation, they're interested in making sure they could be a 3-car team long term. I know they're a 3-car team right now, but their 3rd charter is coming off a lease agreement with Rickwer Racing at the moment, and they're going to get that transition over the 51 for next season. So that's something to look at there. There's other teams that are interested too. I'd have to think you have other teams that are looking at making moves. I look at organizations like, let's say in the Xfinity Series, like a Junior Motorsports, who could down the road move up to NASCAR Cup competition. They're probably interested. They're probably not interested at the market price that they're right now at the moment, but they've expressed interest in getting involved in the sport on the Cup Series side of things. So I think that certainly is interesting. As for Tyler Reddick, getting to him for a second, the big reason I'm focusing on Tyler Reddick right now is because all these drivers in their contracts, they do have contract clauses at the moment right now. Now, Tyler Reddick, I would not expect to become a free agent until after the season is over if they lose their lawsuit, because that's going to be the big thing is what happens to the lawsuit. But I think some have also brought up a really good point that there is a very good chance and possibly this lawsuit may last past December 1st, because we could have appeals coming into play depending on what happens to the ruling. I would not be shocked if this lawsuit does go into 2026. I don't think December 1st is going to be the end of it. Because NASCAR, if they lose the lawsuit, they're probably going to appeal the ruling. And then, of course, 23 on the front row, they're going to appeal it as well if they lose the lawsuit. Because I think right now both sides are even. But Tyler Reddick, talking about him, the main thing I want to talk about is there's a lot of teams that are very interested in Tyler Reddick currently at the moment. And many teams would absolutely love to pick up Tyler Reddick for the 2026 season at this point. I look at Hendrick Motorsports. I know Alex Bowman's got a contract, and I think Bowman absolutely likely will stay with Hendrick. But if you choose between Bowman and Reddick, I'm going to choose Tyler Reddick any given day. Tyler Reddick's won a lot of races with 2311, and I think he'd be a really good driver for that seat. Spire Motorsports, I think they're interested. Justin Haley, there's been a lot of talk recently. He may not be back in that 7 car next year, which is disappointing considering I don't think Justin Haley's been given a fair shake. I know Daniel Suarez hasn't brought up as a possibility for that car as well, but what about Spire picking up Tyler Reddick? I think that would certainly be very interesting and throw a wrench in a lot of things if Tyler Reddick was the driver who went over there next season. And then you think about other drivers who could be teams that could be potential possibilities. What about Team Penske, for example? I know Cinder Tenley is signed through the team for 2026, but could we see him maybe go to Team Penske? I think that would be a very interesting team to look at going into next year on that front, if, of course, depends on what happens to the remainder of the lawsuit. If 2311 front row do get their charters back, though, and they do get to keep them for the remainder of the year, Reddick will not be going anywhere. And Reddick, I think, wants to stay at 2311, but again, it's all this contract clauses, because all these drivers have things in their contracts. Bubba Wallace, same thing. Bubba will probably be able to find a good team as well, because he does have sponsorship with him, and Bubba's actually been having a solid year in NASCAR Cup competition. I know Bubba's not been going out there winning race like Reddick's been winning. I know it's been like 3 years since Bubba's won a race, but Bubba's still a very, very talented driver. I mean, he's in the playoffs currently at the moment right now. I know he's in the bubble at the moment, but Bubba's a solid driver, and I think a team would absolutely want to pick him up at this point. And then Riley Herbst also brings funding and sponsorship to the table, so Riley Herbst would also probably be able to find a ride because of the monster backing, but then you got to look at Noah Gragson. I don't know what he would do at this point. You got to look at other people as well at this moment, like, of course, Zane Smith and Todd Gillen. Those drivers would be in their futures being detriment, and I think front row would definitely be in a lot of questions at this point. So we'll see what happens with the remainder of the lawsuit, but there is a potential chance and possibly that Tyler Reddick could become a free agent at the end of this year. We'll pay attention to stories time progresses and goes on, but yes, at the moment, they are a free agent at the moment if they don't sign and get those charters back here in the not-so-distant future. So that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. List description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are thoughts about Tyler Reddick potentially becoming a free agent at the end of the season if they don't win the lawsuit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are thoughts, of course, about NASCAR not returning to the Chicago Street Course next season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow, we're going to have the intros for the 2025 Brickyard 400, and we're also, of course, going to have another video dropping on the race picks for the Truck Series race at IRP. Then on Wednesday, we'll have the Xfinity picks and a news video more than likely, and then on Thursday, we'll have the Cup race picks for the Brickyard 400, and the paint scheme video maybe as well. Have to kind of wait and see. Then Friday, we'll probably have a news video dropping, and then, of course, I'll have the truck review from IRP. Then, of course, on Saturday, we'll have the Xfinity Series reactions and the Cup qualifying, depending on the weather, and then Sunday, Cup review for the Brickyard 400, starting lineup, and the race review as well, among other things. We got content coming up, people like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Collards, Kurt Busch, Kalish, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Eric Amarola, Chandler Smith, Cleese Farm, Dodge, Ram, you name it, all the good stuff. Connor Zilich, Red Bull Junior Motorsports, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, all the good stuff we'll talk about on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.